All right, everyone, welcome back. Today, we're gonna dig into a story that's, well, it's a bit of a political thriller.
Oh, I like that. A political thriller.
Yeah, and this one really kicks off, like, right out of the gate with a massive funding freeze from the Trump administration. This was back in early 2025.
Yeah, beginning of the year, a lot of states scrambling.
Yeah, a whole lot of them. But this time, we're focusing on Pennsylvania and its governor, Josh Shapiro. Now, Shapiro, he decided to fight back, and he didn't mess around.
Yeah, he went all in.
He really did. We're talking lawsuits, we're talking showdowns at the White House, the whole nine yards. So we're going to unpack exactly what went down, why it matters, and what it might mean for, the balance of power between states and the feds going forward.
Yeah, that push and pull is always fascinating, isn't it? Especially in a case like this where you have such strong personalities on both sides.
Oh, absolutely. And, what makes this case so compelling is it really kind of throws a spotlight on that sometimes rocky relationship between federal and state power. You've got a president who's determined to shake things up spending-wise, and that could mean pulling the rug out from under projects that states are really depending on.
Yeah, it can create a lot of uncertainty and tension, especially when you're talking about billions of dollars.
So can you paint the picture for us a little bit? What was actually at stake for Pennsylvania?
Well, imagine this. $2.1 billion. Poof. Gone. That's what Pennsylvania was expecting, a lot of it tied to the Inflation Reduction Act and that big Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act.
Okay, yeah.
We're talking about, cleaning up rivers and streams, helping farmers deal with runoff, even helping industrial facilities, cut down their carbon footprint. These were like the nuts and bolts projects to make those big Biden administration goals a reality.
So this wasn't just like theoretical money, sitting in some account somewhere. These were real projects, people ready to work, boots on the ground kind of thing. And then suddenly the money's locked up.
Exactly. And remember, the Inflation Reduction Act. It promised a lot of these clean energy environmental initiatives. Pennsylvania was counting on that federal money to actually make it happen.
So how did Shapiro, a Democratic governor, how did he react to this move by the Trump administration?
Oh, he didn't just sit back, I'll tell you that. First, he tried working the system, got Pennsylvania's congressional delegation involved, tried to free up the funding that way.
Didn't work.
Nope.
Okay, so what do you do next? This is where I think things start to get really interesting.
Well, he went straight to the state's attorney general, Dave Sunday, Republican, by the way, and asked him to file a lawsuit against the Trump administration.
Wow. Bold move.
It was. Now, Sunday declined, but this is where you really see Shapiro's, his tenacity.
Yeah, didn't back down, did he?
Not one bit. Shapiro decided, okay, I'll sue the Trump administration myself. And his argument was this funding freeze, illegal and unconstitutional. And get this, Pennsylvania wasn't alone. Over 20 other states, plus D.C., filed similar lawsuits, a real pushback against this White House power play.
Wow, so it was a coordinated effort. This wasn't just a Pennsylvania problem. It was like a nationwide thing. But Shapiro didn't just stop at the lawsuit, right?
I know, he was working all the angles.
Yeah.
You see him directly engaging with senior Trump administration officials. This was at the National Governors Association meeting in D.C.
Right.
And remember, he'd just been appointed to the Council of Governors. That's a bipartisan group. They act as a bridge between the states and the feds. So that gave Shapiro another way to bring Pennsylvania's concerns right to the administration.
So legal pressure, political connections, he was using everything at his disposal. But what happened? What was the result of all this?
Okay, so within weeks of the lawsuit and all this back and forth, the Trump administration unfroze the money, the $2.1 billion for Pennsylvania. And Shapiro, he had this to say, quote, I was very direct with them talking about the administration. They were very responsive to me. And as a result, Pennsylvania now has what is duly owed to us. Pretty strong words.
Yeah, sounds like a win for Shapiro. But it does make you wonder, right? Like, was this a real change of heart from the Trump administration? Or were they just trying to avoid a legal mess? Did Shapiro actually force their hand, or was there something else going on behind the scenes?
And maybe more importantly, what kind of precedent does this set? Does it embolden other governors to do the same thing when they clash with federal policies? What does it tell us about how power is shifting between states and the federal government in this new political landscape?
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack, and we're going to do just that. But first, I want to take a closer look at why this funding was so vital for Pennsylvania. Because, it wasn't just about numbers and a budget. This was about real projects, real people, real impact. What were some of the key initiatives that were, hanging in the balance?
Well, for one, there was funding to help low-income homeowners get access to solar energy. Could have saved them money on electricity, and of course reduce their carbon footprint.
Right. Makes sense.
Then there were these programs to boost energy efficiency in homes, again focused on low-income folks, help them save money, conserve energy.
Yeah.
And you can't forget about those abandoned oil and gas wells, the ones that leak methane. That's a powerful greenhouse gas. Plugging those wells wasn't just some abstract policy thing. It was about protecting people's health, the environment where they live.
That's a really good point. And it kind of gets to the heart of what we're doing here. We're not just talking about political chess moves in Washington. This is about real-world consequences for people.
Exactly. Policy decisions have real-world impacts, and this case really brings that home.
Yeah, it does. It wasn't just the environment, though, right? Shapiro was saying this freeze was hurting Pennsylvania's economy, too.
Oh, absolutely. He was pointing out how some of these projects were, ready to create jobs, especially in that growing clean energy sector.
Yeah.
So putting the brakes on the funding, that had ripple effects way beyond just the environmental stuff.
Yeah, it's all connected, isn't it? Like, this wasn't just an environmental fight or a budget battle. It was about, jobs, people's livelihoods, their daily lives.
Exactly. And it shows the power of a leader who's willing to stand up and fight.
Mm.
Shapiro took on this fight against the federal government, and it seems like it actually made a difference. Makes you wonder, what if other governors start doing the same thing, pushing back against federal policies they don't agree with?
That's what's so interesting about this whole thing, right? Like, could this be the start of, a new era where states get more assertive, more willing to challenge the feds?
It's possible, yeah. And that could lead to a few different things. On the one hand, you could see more gridlock, more lawsuits, more fighting, a kind of fragmented approach where states and the feds are constantly butting heads.
But on the other hand, maybe it forces everyone to work together more. Maybe the feds have to be more responsive to what states need, and that leads to better policies that actually work for people on the ground.
That's an interesting thought. Maybe this tension, this back and forth, actually makes the whole system work better in the long run. Something to watch for sure.
Now let's zoom in a little bit on the political side of things, because it wasn't just Shapiro making noise, right? Other folks in Pennsylvania were weighing in too, Democrats and Republicans.
Oh yeah, definitely. You had a real mix of opinions within Pennsylvania itself. You had Elizabeth Fiedler, Democratic state representative. She was publicly praising Shapiro, for standing up to Trump. She was really emphasizing how this funding freeze was hurting working families.
Okay, but then you also had some Republicans who weren't so happy about it, right?
Right. Dan Mooser, Republican congressman, he was criticizing Shapiro's decision to sue. Said he should have tried to work things out with the White House first, before going straight to the courts.
Interesting. What was his reasoning there?
Well, there's some speculation that Mooser might run for governor himself in 2026, so maybe he's trying to position himself as someone who can, play nice with a Republican president.
The political game, right. Makes you think, how much of this pushback from Republicans was about actual policy and how much was about, politics positioning themselves for future elections?
It's tough to say for sure, but it shows that even within one state, you have these really different ideas about how federalism should work. The whole relationship between the state and the feds.
Stepping back for a second, I think this case says something about federalism in the U.S. as a whole. That balance of power between the federal government and each state, it's always changing, but it feels like things are especially turbulent right now.
Yeah, no doubt. We're seeing states assert themselves more. They want more autonomy. They're pushing back when they think the feds are overreaching. And this Pennsylvania case is a perfect example of that. It makes you wonder what's next.
Right. Like, if this keeps up, if states get more and more assertive, does that mean a weaker federal government, a more decentralized system?
It's possible. Or maybe it forces everyone to find a new balance, a system where both sides have to actually negotiate and compromise,
Yeah.
And what does that mean for people? Do they have more say in how their state is run? Or does it just create more confusion? Those are the million-dollar questions. Tough to answer. But one thing's for sure. This Pennsylvania case, it's a sign of the times. It shows that federalism isn't some fixed thing. It's constantly changing, shaped by politics, lawsuits, and, leaders who are willing to shake things up.
It reminds us that this isn't just some theoretical debate. It's about real people's lives. Clean energy, the environment, jobs, the well-being of communities, it all ties back to this.
Yeah, exactly. It's a call to action for all of us,
Yeah.
As citizens, we got to pay attention to what's happening, engage in these discussions, make our voices heard. Because at the end of the day, We all have a say in shaping the future of federalism in this country.
Now, before we wrap things up completely, there's one more thing about the Pennsylvania story I think is worth highlighting. It's about, well, finding common ground, even in the middle of a legal fight. Like, even though Shapiro was suing the Trump administration, he was still willing to sit down with them, talk things through, try to find a solution.
You're talking about his meetings of the National Governors Association and his work on the Council of Governors?
Yeah.
Yeah, it shows he was willing to be pragmatic. He wasn't just trying to score political points or be stubborn. He wanted to get those funds released, get those projects moving.
And it seems like that approach, actually engaging with the other side, building relationships, that might have helped him get what he wanted. It's a good reminder that even when people disagree, they can still work together.
It's an important point. Even in politics, which can feel so divided, there's still room for common sense, for finding solutions that work for everyone.
It's a hopeful note, for sure, but it also brings up some final questions, like if this kind of collaboration worked in this case, could it work in other situations? Could it be a model for how we deal with these kind of disagreements in the future?
And more broadly, what does it tell us about the potential for bridging the divides in our country, for finding common ground on some of the biggest issues we face?
That's a good question. We've looked at the legal battles, the politics, the real-world impact of this funding freeze. But I think in the end, this story is also about the importance of talking to each other, of compromise, and the possibility of finding solutions that benefit everyone.
Yeah, it's kind of wild, isn't it? Like they're in court fighting, and at the same time, they're like, hey, let's grab coffee and figure this out.
Yeah, it does show you there can be more than one way to approach these things, It doesn't always have to be all or nothing. Right, like maybe you can fight the good fight and still keep the lines of communication open.
Exactly. And honestly, that can be refreshing, can it? Instead of just digging in your heels, maybe you can find a way to actually move forward.
I mean, that would be nice, wouldn't it? To get past all the gridlock and actually, get stuff done.
I think we'd all like that.
Yeah.
But it does take a certain maturity, politically speaking, and a real commitment to finding common ground.
Yeah.
Which honestly can be hard to come by these days.
Yeah, no kidding. But this Pennsylvania case, I don't know, it kind of gives me a little bit of hope. It shows that even when things are super polarized, there's still room for being practical and, working together.
It does. And maybe it's a sign of things to come. Maybe we'll see more of this moving forward. States standing up for themselves, but also being open to solutions that work for everyone.
Yeah, interesting. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's worth leaving folks with this thought. This whole thing really shows how important it is to be involved, at the state level, the federal level, whether it's speaking up at town halls, contacting your representatives, or even running for office yourself. There are ways to make your voice heard and shape the future.
Couldn't agree more. And this Pennsylvania case proves that the decisions made in Washington, in state capitals, even in courtrooms, they all have a real impact on people's lives.
Exactly. So as we move forward in this, ever-changing political landscape, we got to stay informed, stay involved, and stay engaged. The future of federalism, how powers balance between states and the feds, it's something we all have a hand in shaping.
And remember, it's not just some abstract idea. This is about real people's lives. Access to clean energy, a healthy environment, job opportunities. It all comes back to this.
Well said. Well, that about wraps it up for this deep dive into the world of federalism. Thanks for joining us. We hope you learned something and maybe even got you thinking a little bit.
And until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.
See ya.